Did you know it's surprisingly simple to draw and paint winter trees? So simple that even if you're an absolute beginner, you can draw and paint these. I couldn't decide which medium to use here, so I did two trees. One in watercolor pencil, which is great if you love the control a pencil provides. But if you're ready to loosen up with watercolor, I think you'll really enjoy the process of painting the watercolor tree. I've included timestamps so you can jump right to the tree of your choice. For my watercolor pencils, I'll be using Faber-Castell. Then for watercolor paint, I'm going to be using Van Gogh because this is a fast-paced project. However, you can use the watercolor brand of your choice. Now for my paper, I actually used Canson Excel, which is a cheaper watercolor paper, and that made the background a bit more challenging. It worked really well for the trees, but as you see in this video, I ended up kind of making the decision to add those backgrounds as I went, just to show you how it could be done. But I would actually recommend, if you are going to do those backgrounds, maybe use a better quality cotton paper for that. It just will make it a little bit easier for you. If you decide to skip the background altogether, I've also included timestamps for that, so you can just skip right past the background and go right onto your tree. So here you see me working much more tentatively. I'm working very lightly and I'm trying to more or less center my triangle on my paper. It doesn't have to be precise, but I'm gonna kind of try for that. And then I'll go ahead and draw these clumps in. And this is a great time to let yourself have the shakes as you do the underside of these snow clumps. I actually feel like that's coming naturally for me today. I don't know if I had a little too much caffeine or what, but it seems like I'm having no problem having a little bit of shakes. So let yourself be as organic and abstract as you can along the bottom of each of these snow clumps. And you're gonna also notice that I'm not filling in every single little space. I'm gonna come back in and fill some of these gaps with some smaller snow clumps. So what you're really aiming for is shapes that are kind of like this, right? A little bit like more rounded at the top. Let's just do a few shapes here to practice. Something like that. Or when you're working your way down the tree, they're going to be a little bit more wide and they're going to be something like this. You don't want something that's like this. And you don't want something that's too much like an umbrella. So this is another shape you want to avoid. Something like that where everything's a little bit too symmetrical. These are a little too lined up and a little too umbrella on the top. It's better to err on the side of just kind of a little bit more stretched out if you can. And if you find the little bumps on the bottom hard, makes more sense to just kind of make it a little bit more like that. Just a little less bumpy. Does that make sense? So those are just a few tips for drawing our snow clumps. I'm going to do one more tree and run through it super fast. I just want you to be able to see here how my shapes are just that little bit different this time around. And I'm actually branching a little bit further outside of my triangle this time. And you'll also notice, maybe you would say even some of these shapes are a bit wonky. So I want you to know you can give yourself quite a bit of grace with this project. Just practice, play with these snow shapes, maybe look at pictures or look outside your window if it's snowy right now, and you'll be able to see how different varieties of trees, as well as the amount of snow, how sticky the snow is, and the overall shape of the tree is going to affect the exact shape of these snow clumps. So like I say, you've got a little bit of grace here to kind of just make your shapes a little bit organic and abstract and just have fun with it. So you can definitely see there's a difference between these two trees. This one has a lot more of these little bumpy details along the bottom. This one has fewer, and yet I think they're both going to work beautifully. So just keep that in mind. You can definitely keep things more simple. And I would rather that you would make things a little more simple along the bottom than to take these little things and make them too finger-like, if that makes sense. Yes, they kind of do go like that because they're on top of the branches. On the top, it's like pillowy, like the snow just comes down and creates this pillowy look, right? Along the bottom, it's going to have a little more texture, or it can have more texture because it's actually laying on those little pine branches that are poking out from under it. So you can definitely get away with a little bit of that. Just try and avoid it looking like too much like fingers like I showed you in that example earlier. Before we go ahead and add the paint, I'm just going to grab my kneadable eraser and lift everything. Definitely get rid of as much of the triangle as possible and then get rid of any really heavy lines here. So I think what I'm going to do is do this one that's got a little more detail in my watercolor pencil, and then I'll do this larger, looser looking one in watercolor paint afterwards. So you'll be able to kind of see how I do both. And I'm going to try and work a little bit looser when I'm working in the watercolor. And I'll include a timestamp so that you can find the watercolor one if you want to skip right to that and not even watch the watercolor pencil. So I've got this nice, beautiful blue here, and I'm going to start by shading or drawing some shadows into these shapes. So I'm going to come along the left side. I'm going to pretend, let me just grab a scrap of paper here and draw ourselves a little sunshine. I'm going to pretend that the sun is on our upper right side, something like that. That's just a little reminder for yourself. If you ever struggle with knowing where to put your shadows, just remember where your sun is. Decide, you can put it wherever you want up here, but you're going to want to be consistent. And so I'm going to always put mine on the upper right side, just to keep it simple. And just imagine that sun is just coming down this direction on your tree, which means anything kind of on the right side is going to be lighter than anything on the left side. So I'm going to be keeping that in mind as I go ahead and shade these. So I'm going to put some shadow on the left side of each of these shapes, and I'm kind of working a little bit with the side of my pencil, a little bit light pressure, because this blue that I have on here is a rather intense blue. So I don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to be putting the shadow on the left, as you see me do here, and then a little bit on the bottom of each of these shapes. And in general, I can put a little bit more of the shadow if I want to on the left side of the whole, like the tree in general. So anything that's more to the left can have more of the blue, and all the ones on the right can have less, but each clump is still going to have some shadow because it's going to have a light side and a dark side to it. So I'm just going to quickly cover my shadow shapes. I think it's pretty self-explanatory at this point. You can see what I'm doing here. Once I've got that color on, I decided to make this a little extra special and put a little bit of a second blue in my shadows. And so I'm just going to go on the very, very farthest left. So the part that's to the farthest left on the tree, but then again on the shapes, and just put a little bit of this blue. It's hard to see it right now, but it's a little bit more of like a royal blue or a little bit more purpley blue. And so I just want to put it where I'm going to have the deepest, darkest shadows. So not everywhere that I put my lighter blue, just to the furthest left and lowest down. And I'm going to be putting a little bit more of it maybe as I come close to the bottom here. Maybe even, I might even come back in with a little bit more of my other blue, we'll see. Yeah, I'm going to throw just a tiny little bit more of my lighter blue in a few spots. All right, so this is now ready for us to add water. So I've got my water dish beside me, and I've got some paper towel. And I'm going to be using my Simply Simon's brushes, which are a little stiffer. They hold a little bit less water than the watercolor brushes I'm going to be using today. I'm going to just dab this off on my paper towel. I want it to be wet, but not soaking wet, because if I'm too wet, the pigment might bleed out more than I want it to. So I'm just going to start in the light side of each of these shapes, and I'm just putting water, and then I'm going to come work my way into the shadow. And I'm actually bouncing my brush around a little bit so that I get a little bit of a bumpy kind of effect to my snow, if that makes sense. And you can see as I hit that blue area, all of a sudden that pigment's just kind of wanting to go poof into my water. And so I want to be very cautious in terms of how much it moves that way. If it's moving too much, I can always dry my brush off a little bit and soak it up. But I think I'm happy with that overall. So I'm going to go ahead and just add water to all of my shapes. Right now I have a number 8 round, but you might want to use a 6. I have a feeling I'm going to be moving into the 6 here because this one's feeling a bit chunky right now. Once again, we'll light side first, move into the darks. It's kind of that fine balance with how much water you want to add. You don't want to have it soaking wet, or you don't want to over blend, if that makes sense. But these ones feel a bit dry to me. You can almost see the texture there, and I'm not too crazy about that. So I'm going to add a little bit more water, because as long as I don't like massage it too much with my paintbrush when I come into these shadows here, I should be able to be okay. I'm going to just rub it around just enough to get that pigment flowing, and then let it be, because it's going to move a little bit on its own, right? If it's not moving enough, you can encourage it around, but you don't want to just go crazy and have all these beautiful shadows that we created just disappear on us because you over blend. So tempting to do. Also, you're going to note that pretty much between every single shape, I do wash and dry my brush, because I'm not wanting to drag the pigment that's on my brush from this shape, say, to this shape here. I want to make sure that I'm coming in first clean, and then getting that pigment, picking it up and moving it around just where I want it to be. And if right now I was to jump into a nice bright shape the way my brush is when I haven't cleaned it, you'll look here, I'm already dropping blue in. And sometimes you might be okay with that, but sometimes that might be, you know, if you keep doing that, you're gonna have too much pigment on your brush and it's just gonna end up obliterating your shadows. Or I should say, it will obliterate the whites because you'll get shadow everywhere. All right, so that is done. I'm gonna let it dry. If you feel like any of your whites are disappearing on you, you can just grab your paper towel and just gently kind of dab it ever so carefully. You don't wanna go too crazy, but you can kind of just gently dab it and you're gonna be able to kind of pull some of the pigment out. If you found that you were getting maybe a little bit too much of your darks running into your lights at all, you can do this. At least in the areas where it's still wet enough. And then we're gonna go ahead and let that dry and I'll be back to do the branches. All right, so our snow has dried, but I'm gonna give you guys an optional step. You can decide if you wanna do this or if you don't wanna do it, that's totally good too. But if you wanna turn this into a snow scene, I would actually do it now before we add the darker colors. And so to do that, I would just use my same two blues that I used before and drop them in to kind of get a little bit of a snowy effect. So we could use our pencil to draw in where we want the lines of our snow to be, but you know what? We could even just, like we could use a drawing pencil, but I'm just gonna use my watercolor pencils and just draw in some snow back here and maybe just do a couple of almost like clumps of snow where I'm gonna just put some snow and make it kind of fade upwards, if that makes sense. Snow fade upwards, maybe like it's a hill. And maybe put a little bit more over here because again, our light source is the same. Let's grab that paper. Our light source is still the same, right? And so we're gonna want to have our shadows on the left of the tree. So that's where I'm gonna just use the side of my pencil and just gently, quickly scribble some of this shadow color in. And this is my lighter blue of the two I used. And then I'm gonna come in with my darker blue and just deepen things a little bit right here, closer to the tree. You could probably even get away with putting a bit of green into the shadow because it could be reflecting off of the tree, but let's keep it simple and just use these blue colors and just throw it in here and quickly wet it. And let's give ourselves a little bit of sky color. Now skies are always bluest at the top or the zenith. So I'm just gonna use, ooh, I'm scratching this. So I'm just gonna use the side of my pencil here and just put a little bit along the top. And this is the lighter blue. I might use both just to kind of keep things harmonized, but I'm just going to come in here and I'm just using very sloppy, kind of scribbly side of the brush, or side of the pencil rather, motion to create the sky. And I'm going to just put a little bit of the darker blue that we used just at the very, very top. So I don't want it everywhere, just at the top. And then we're going to blend this around with water. So just do that quickly. Bring my water close, and this is where I'm gonna just go ahead and quickly fill this part in with water because I'm gonna leave most of the sky fairly light. So I'm just gonna fill this in with water, and this is where you wouldn't want all that dark green from your tree in here or it could start mushing around on you. So I'm gonna work my way up into here now on both sides. We could even have a little more dark if we wanted to on the left because it's further from the sun, but that's okay. We're just gonna get this in here and I'm just gonna go back and forth and kind of fill this in. This isn't probably the most amazing way to do a sky in watercolor pencil, but we're going to do it this way because it's simple and it's just giving us a really basic, nice blue winter sky. Do you guys have nice blue winter skies where you live? We do in Alberta. We have beautiful blue skies even on winter, not when it's snowing, of course, but winter days where we have some really beautiful blue skies still. Okay, just going back and forth with the back and forth motion. I'm probably being a bit sloppy here. Yeah, it's drying a little fast on me. Sorry. I'm just gonna go over this again and smooth it out because it is drying too fast. I'm getting a goofy bloom here. Okay, that's okay. I'm gonna leave that be now. I'm gonna not worry about having that little blue line at the top. We could always trim that off. I don't want to overdo, and I just want to make sure that the sky is more or less smooth. So I'm just soaking up some of the water here. I think we'll be fine. Okay, I'm gonna come in quickly to the ground and then I'm gonna let this dry once again. It's gonna be way more rippled than it was before because we've just put so much water on here. But I kind of like the effect. So I'm gonna just come in here. So again, I work from light to dark. Do that over here, work from light to dark. And I'm gonna come in here, light again. I might just let these blend a little bit here. You could leave them like hills that are a little bit more separated, but I'm just gonna blend it. Be quick and simple. And then I'm gonna come in here. So as you can see, I wet the area that was white or light first, the white snow, and then I'm coming into my shadows. And yes, the shadows are a little rough because I haven't gotten the base of my tree done, but that's okay. Just do something simple like that. And with it being wet, everything's just gonna bleed around like so. And we're gonna let that be. And as I said, we're gonna have to let it dry before we do anything else. So I will do that and then I'll be back. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add our green now. I've got a nice deep green by Faber-Castell. This one is chrome oxide green, but then I also have a few other colors I might add, but I'm gonna just start with the green. And I'm gonna come in here and just fill in the areas of this triangle with kind of a scribbly motion. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm happy with the bottom. You can use like your green to kind of create the outline of the snow that's above. But then when you come underneath it, like kind of like so, you come like this, you can actually take a few strokes of your pencil this direction, almost so that it comes on top of some of these snow clumps below it and a little bit to the side. So you don't want to go too crazy with this, but it'll add and give you the opportunity to add a few branches that are sticking out. Color along there nice and smooth, right? And then you're gonna have these branches kind of, you can take a little bit of artistic license and just kind of make some of them kind of poke out on top like this. Why don't we just fill it in quick with the coloring, and then we'll add the other parts in a sec. Then I'm going to come back on top with a sharper pencil and just quickly create some of these little branches. Don't have to do it everywhere. I kind of think I overdid it right there, just in a few places. I want to leave some of my pillowy tops showing. You can make those branches kind of come peeking out from under your clumps of snow, kind of like that, right? Once again, make sure you maintain those nice abstract shapes at the lower parts of each of your clumps. And if you've lost them, it's a great time to just kind of draw them back in there. And then I'm going to grab my darker, you can either use a super dark green, I'm actually using my indigo blue, and I'm just going to scribble a little bit of it kind of in the direction of my pine branches on the left side of the tree, which is going to, again, emphasize the fact that the left side is further away from the light. And so we're creating shadow even within our pine branches. So I'm just going to go in and do that really quickly in a few spots, especially, as I said, on the left, not so much on the right. If you want to put it on the right, you could put it kind of directly under the snow clumps in a few places, because that's where the shadow would fall. But like, don't overdo on that side. There's the area we really want to emphasize our shadows is on the left of the tree. Finally, I'm adding a small touch of India red. You want to be careful not to overdo it, but I personally like the way it tones down some of the greens and just adds a little bit more variety to my trees. Do you enjoy working in watercolor pencil? If so, I think you'll be interested in my free 2-part pencil technique mini workshop. Whether you're looking for ways to add texture to your work, or if you simply enjoy coloring and would like to add dimension to your coloring pages, this workshop is for you. You can even apply many of these techniques to graphite pencil or other dry media. I'll share examples of how I apply these techniques to inspire you with ideas for your own artwork. You can sign up for this workshop at the link in the description below. Now back to today's video. All right, let's go ahead and add the water now. So I'm going to grab my brush again and my water, and once again, make sure I'm fairly dry. I'm actually going to want to even be drier when I work on these than I was with the snow shapes, because I want to maintain more of the detail and I don't want a big mess. So I'm just actually working fairly dry, and I'm just going to stroke these little branches in the same way that I drew them. When I'm working along this outside edge, I'm actually allowing the brush to create some of these little pine needles. I'm just kind of stroking it outwards. I'm going to do this edge, this outer edge to the right first, just because I do have less pigment here. And that's going to allow me to get a slightly lighter look. You can see I'm wet enough that I am creating a little bit of these branches. If I was super dry, I wouldn't be able to drag that paint out as easily, but I want to drag a little because we do want the beauty of our watercolor pencils to shine a little bit. We just don't want to go overboard and have everything, you know, blending and mushing around too much in this case. And I mentioned this before, but to get really fine lines with your brush, you're going to want to use light pressure and not too much water. So as usual, when I'm working with watercolor pencil, I do keep dabbing my brush off on my paper towel. When it starts to get too saturated with pigment, I'll wash it and then dry it, just so things are relatively controlled as far as I don't want things too wet. And I also most definitely do not want to drag my darkest darks everywhere. And you can see just how having a little bit of that indigo blue and India red kind of mixed in my green just creates just that little bit of variation. And then it really starts to show, doesn't it, when I add the water? It just adds a little bit of life, and I really like the way that looks. And since things are pretty redundant, I'm just going to speed the camera up as I work my way through this tree. I think I like that. And if you decide you want a bit of kind of the same colors that are in the tree sort of reflecting in the shadow a bit more, you can always just scribble a little bit of the green into the shadow. A little bit risky here. And I might put a little bit of that indigo blue just so that it's a deeper blue and we're able to get a slightly deeper shadow. And then you're just going to want to be really careful as you blend this, just because we've already done quite a lot of blending down in the shadow area. I just feel like the shadow could maybe be pushed just a bit darker. It feels to me like it's a little light still. This is optional though. I always tell students, if I do anything that's kind of scary, just watch me first and decide if you actually want to do it to yours. To blend it, I think I'm going to just kind of almost like scrub a little bit and just kind of blend this around. And I might not even get a really soft edge on the outside of my shadow. I'm just going to first start with blending, and I'm kind of going a little bit like in a, I don't know if you want to say curly, but just a little bit everywhere, every which direction, just to kind of get this blended and have an abstract shadow shape. I might have to come in and refine my branches a bit after this. We'll see. Actually, I don't mind that too much. I'll just come in gently with some clear water now, just kind of soften the edges ever so slightly, just in a few places. You don't even have to have everything soft. I actually don't mind some of those hard edges there. I think they're kind of neat. So do what you want to do for blending that shadow into the background, but I think that's probably good enough. Maybe I'll just take a little bit of the indigo off my pencil with my brush and just put just a tiny bit more. I don't want to push this too far, but yeah, that's better, I think. The one thing I'm not too crazy about is kind of how this transition happens. This is maybe supposed to be a hill, but it's just kind of weird. I think I'm going to just pull a little tiny bit of that blue downwards from our sky into here. So I'm going to put, this is kind of, I don't want much of it, but I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of this blue. This is my lighter blue to kind of create a little bit of a horizon line here. And I'm going to make the blue of the sky just a smidgen bit darker than the snow. Now, I'm really not wanting the sky to be too blue there. I just want to separate it from the snow is really what I'm after. So I'm just putting that tiny little bit there, and I'm going to try and really blend it out. So I've got my wide 1-inch brush here, and I'm just going to kind of blend it a little bit and drag it. I'm trying to avoid getting close to my tree because I do not want to drag my green around by any chance. So just kind of massage it a tiny bit with that brush and then just drag it upwards. Put a little bit on my brush like this right off the pencil. Oh, that was the wrong blue. Oh well, that's okay. I'm going to just use a fairly dry brush and just drag it up. Like I say, drag it up because I'm just trying to just barely add some blue to my sky. The other thing I could do to create that horizon would have been to even just add some, maybe like a tree line there instead. That would be another option. So all I'm doing here is just using my damp brush just to very softly and gently blend that color out. Don't want to do anything too crazy, as you can see. So just being really careful and fairly dry actually, because I don't have too much pigment here I'm working with. For my watercolor tree, I thought it might be kind of fun to play with a few different colors in the snow. So we're gonna play around a little bit. If you wanna keep it simple, if you're just a beginner and you wanna use one color of blue, use one color of blue. I have a bright blue here. This is very intense, so I'm gonna have to make sure I don't take very much of it. This is a very blue-gray, very dark. And then I have a purple, and I think I might play with all of those three, dropping them in and just experimenting. But absolutely, you can use one color or two colors of blue. You do not need to have all three colors. I just thought it might be kind of fun to see how these colors kind of mix and mingle together as I put them onto my snowy shapes. And once again, we're going to use the same light source as we used with our watercolor pencil tree. We're going to say that the sun is on our upper right. So I drew this cute little sun here, super fancy. And I'm going to just put it here as a reminder to ourselves that's where our light is coming from. We want our shadows to be on the left side as well as the lower side of each of these little snow clumps. So keep that in mind. We want to be consistent. You could switch your light source. There's no reason you can't, put it over here. I just tend to like putting it here just because it's like kind of just becomes my habit, and it's just faster for me then to quickly lay my shadows into my shapes when I'm just kind of taking some artistic license like I'm doing today. I've got my water jar here, and I actually have an Artegria brush which will hold more water than the Simply Simons brushes, but you can definitely use a Simply Simons brush as well for this. There's no reason you have to use this. I just sometimes enjoy playing with this when I want to work loose. The Artegria brush just holds more water and it's a softer brush. So I'm going to go ahead and fill a shape in with my water first. Then I'm going to start dropping in some color, and then probably what I'll do is speed it up and wet a few shapes at a time. But let's just do one shape for now, and then once we get the hang of it, we'll do a few shapes at once. So I've got the water in, taking a very, very tiny little bit of that phthalo blue. I hope I don't have too much. Oh no, we're okay. Just lifting a little bit out of the side of my palette there because this blue can be very overpowering. And I'll just drop it into the shadow side of my shape here. And I am using cheaper paper, so I might get some blooms and just funny things happening, which I'm okay with. I kind of like that look. But if you use something like arches, you'll typically be able to avoid those kind of puddles or blooms, cauliflower edges, whatever you want to call them. So I'm just going to drop some of this phthalo blue in here, a little bit more, and then maybe a little bit of the purple. See what we think of this combination. I feel like I got a little bit more of the kind of grayish color than I would have liked, but I do like having those other colors mingle. So I'm going to carry on. I'm going to do a few shapes, wetting them, and then I will go ahead and add my color. So let's just do a few shapes, get the water into maybe 3. Let's see if we can work fast enough. If you can't work fast enough, just do as many as you're comfortable with. Ooh, I kind of put more shadow on the top of that one than I would have liked. That's not so smart, Jessica. Let's try and stick with the bottom. Just trying to lift that out a little bit. So I'm basically just starting with the phthalo blue, dropping it in, and then deciding if I want to throw a little bit of that purple or kind of that dark gray blue in there. But as I mentioned before, if you want to keep this as simple as possible, choose one blue and just go with that. I'm just going to grab my paper towel and just dab a little bit. I feel like my lights are almost disappearing. I'm going a little too heavy with my shadows in a few spots. That's better. Just lifting a little bit. Whenever I get a little too much pigment, like I did just there, I'm just using a clean, thirsty brush. So I kind of basically wash my brush, dry it, so it's just nice and thirsty, and come in and soak up a little bit of the puddle. You don't want to overdo that technique because you might end up flattening that beautiful effect that we're getting, but it is a way to be able to lift if you've overdone something or gone too dark. So just keep that in mind. Dropping my shadow along the bottom, once again with that phthalo blue. Then I'll decide how much of this other blue I want to drop in. Maybe just in a few places this time. And a little bit of the purple. You can see how pretty it is just with the phthalo blue, right? So maybe I should have just stuck with the phthalo blue. I just thought, oh, it might be fun to throw some other colors in there if anyone's wanting a little bit of variety or challenge. But let's just take a look at this shape with just the phthalo blue. Isn't that pretty? And if that's all you're using, that's gonna be just gorgeous still. And you might even think it's prettier than these ones that I've dropped these dark colors into. It's really up to you. I'd like to know in the comments, actually, what do you guys think? Do you think this tree will be prettier with just sticking with one blue? Definitely make it a touch bit easier to do that. But do you guys like this experiment? Again, dropping some of that blue in. I really changed the shape on this one as I added my water, but that's okay. That's the beauty of this. We have a lot of freedom to kind of just be loose and playful, because we are going to be getting some darks in here, and that's going to kind of cover anything that we've done or pencil lines that are kind of showing through a bit funny. So I'm just going to go ahead and wet these few little shapes here. Maybe I can do all the final shapes because they're pretty small. Let's see. Ooh, lots of blue there. Let's just pick that up and move it around. You wouldn't have to move it around either. You could just like use a clean thirsty brush, soak it out, or even your paper towel. But I don't know if it's the stingy side of me or if it's just convenient, but I'm just picking it up and moving it around. All right, I'm happy with that. I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'll be back to add in our branches. I'm not sure. Do we want to add a sky and background snow to this? I don't know. My goal is to really teach you about the trees. The rest seems a little bit excessive, but maybe you want to turn this into a winter scene. So maybe we'll go ahead and wet the background and just give it a little bit of color in the sky. So I'm just using a nice big fat brush. This one is a 1 inch, but there's no reason you couldn't just wet this with a smaller brush. It just takes a bit longer, but I'm just going to quickly do this and just fill it in with water quick, and then we'll quickly do the sky. Could have even done the sky actually before we even did the rest of it, but I really wasn't actually thinking too much about doing a background with this. I was thinking more about the trees, so I don't know. You guys can tell me what you think about adding a background to this, if it's necessary or helpful, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I'm just going to go ahead. I got a little bit of phthalo blue on my brush. I got to add a little more water just for good measure. And just come in here and drop a little bit along the top. And I'm not even doing a proper wash. I'm just dropping some blue into the top of this sky. I don't want to overdo it. Just drop a little bit. Ooh, okay. That's too much almost. Yikes. Wash my brush off really quick. Try and dry that. Cheaper watercolor paper actually isn't the best for doing big flat washes like this. Oh well, got myself in it now. I'm gonna have to drop a little bit of the other colors in there to keep it harmonized, but okay. Let's just blend this out and then just drop a teeny weeny little bit of the purple. Might use one of my rounder brushes here quick. Yeah, this effect would be really pretty using Arches watercolor paper because we could get some interesting, beautiful patterns in the sky, but that's okay. We're just gonna use the paper we have at this point and just do this. I'm going to clean up the beading that's happening. The paint is kind of all pooling to the side here. And I actually purposely want this side to be a little darker because it is kind of shadowy. I'm just going to let it be that way for now. I'm not super fond of my sky here, but just kind of rub a little bit of this around as if it's maybe like a little bit of cloud or something in the atmosphere. And I'm going to just call that good. This isn't really supposed to be a landscape. Kind of getting a funny bloom up there, but yeah, I'm using cheap paper, so I wouldn't I'm not going to sweat it because I know it's not going to let me have too much grace. I think I'm just going to go ahead and let that dry, and then we will add the rest of the snow later. All right, now that this is dry, I'm feeling maybe brave enough to go and put a little bit of shadow underneath up here for the tree. I also will mention that I did give this a quick little iron, so it's not quite as rippled and crazy as it was there at when I first finished wetting it. So it's dry and then I ironed it. So what I do to iron it actually is I'll just take paper towel, like basically make a sandwich, paper towel on the back, paper towel on the front, turn it over, and the paper towel that's on the back, I'll actually mist it a little bit with water, and then I'll use the iron. And it does help. It's not perfect, but it helps. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pretend that the snow line is here. So I could have probably done this with my last step, but oh well. I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of water kind of just along here. This is kind of where I'm just dragging it up a little teeny weeny little bit. And I'll just put the tiniest little bit of color along the edge of it, just so that it kind of gives the impression that this is the sky, and then the lower part here will be the snow. And I think the sky should be just a smidgen bit darker than the snow. So I'm just putting a little bit of blue here, even though yes, we don't want to put too much because we are working closer to the horizon, and usually, well, at least in the middle of the day, which is what we are depicting here, the horizon area is very light, so I don't want to overdo the blue, but I just want to make it different than the snow. So I'm just like barely picking up any of my blue color on my brush and just dragging it on there. That was my phthalo blue here. Okay, that's all I'm going to do there. And then I'm going to just be careful as I wet. I'm going to try not to come right up to my snow line, or to my sky line there rather. I'm just going to wet the lower section, and I'm going to try and avoid dragging my paint that close so I don't get any kind of weird hard edges. Again, this whole background thing is totally optional. It was kind of a last minute decision on my part, and I'm not sure if I would say it's the smartest one. And like I say, I probably should have chosen better paper if I was going to do that, but I will. I made the decision now. So I'm going to come in here with a little bit of my phthalo blue to create a shadow, because of course our sun is still coming from here, right? So the tree itself is going to be casting a shadow on the snow in this area. And I'm fine with dragging it up into the tree a bit, because my tree is going to be so dark, you're not going to be able to tell kind of where the edge of the snow shadow is up there. So mainly doing that shadow first with this blue, and then I'll again, of course, drop in our other colors just because we're trying to create some harmony here. Just drop a little bit. You know what? I'm going to put more of it kind of just under the tree a bit here. And you don't have to use this fat brush for that. I'm just doing it because that's what I wet the background with, but any brush would do. And maybe a little bit of that purple color. And then I'll blend it around. I actually like the way it looked with just the blue, except that it was not harmonious yet. So gotta keep adding a little bit of that phthalo blue in here just to push it a little bit. So I'm just gonna put a touch more of that phthalo blue because I do like it. Maybe something like that. Let's just do something like that. I think that's good enough for a shadow. At least it feels good enough right now. Sometimes when you get the other darks on, this won't feel as dark as it feels right now. So I don't know, maybe a little bit more of this color under here. This is where we're going to want it dark. So plus actually the green is going to, we're going to want a bit of harmony anyway. So that gray blue is going to be the closest thing we're going to have to green right now. Just blend this out just a little touch. And then once again, I'll let it dry really quick. So you can either let it air dry, or if you are in a hurry, you can just go grab your hair dryer, which is what I think I will do. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and add our branches. And I wanna try and keep this nice and loose and playful. So I've got my Artegria brush again. And I've got a couple of greens, one that's slightly lighter, a darker one, and I'm probably going to add some of these darker blues here, not the phthalo blue by itself, but probably my blue-gray and the purple one. We'll see. But I'm just going to try and keep this loose and playful. Try and remind myself to loosen up because I'm feeling rather tight. And let's just see. Let's go in here with this green and then as I come out, I'm going to try and just use the tip of the brush and do these branches and make them kind of come out like so. Fill this in. I've got so much paint on my brush right now, I'll just kind of come around with it and try and do these very loose strokes. And I'm going to try and keep smooth along the bottom edge of these snow puffs, right, or whatever we call them. And then I'll let the branches kind of come out from underneath like so, like this. Bring this one down a little bit. It was so wet I had to almost like drag my paint around a little bit. I'm going to try and maybe just paint it more or less with this one green, and then I'll come in afterwards and drop a little bit of the other greens in if I feel like I need them. I might even just do part of the tree, and once it starts to dry a little bit, I'll just drop those other colors in. I should say not start to dry, but just maybe before it dries. How's that? Before it dries, I'll drop those other colors in. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go straight into this blue-gray and drop some of that into my shadow side. Come back into my green, see if I can finish this off. We'll see if I can work fast enough. I'm trying to be loose and not overthink it. Working with the tip of my brush, more or less. Again, I'm just kind of almost carving the bottom of this with my brush just so that I keep it smooth, and then here is where I kind of go more abstract and just do these loose branches. And when I notice things are starting to look a bit dry, that's where I'm going to just come in quickly here and grab my darker blue and just drop some in so that I'm able to achieve my shadows before things get too dry. It's just kind of a bit of a balancing act with that green. Let's just come in here and try a few more loose, simple things. Ooh, it's okay, we're trying to be loose. Just try and work around these shapes, carving the bottoms of them again. Kind of light, or sorry, really heavy with my paint here. It's just thick for wanting to be in my light side. So I could leave that be, or I could just soak it up a tiny bit with a paper towel if I'm wanting a little less of the darkness there. Either way, I'll just have to come into the shadow side in a quick minute here and drop some more shadow color in here. I'm just going to let this shadow come on top of the, or branches rather, come on top of the snow. You can see things are almost looking like they're drying down here. Again, just carve our last little shape out. Do just a few tiny little branches kind of poking out from underneath. I think for the most part, things are wet enough over here in the shadow side. I can drop a little bit more of that blue. And like I say, I want to maybe put a little bit, ooh, pretty dry here. Put maybe a tiny bit of that purple just to create a little bit of harmony. But let's get the blue in first. I do like the way I can get these interesting little puddles happening. And this is one area I don't mind that cheap paper is I don't mind that look. All right. I think I'm still wet enough. I can drop a little bit of purple in here in just a few spots. Some places it's going on a little bit dry, but that's okay. I'm trying to just get it on there and not overwork it. And I don't actually mind the places where it is already kind of drying. It just adds a little bit of texture. And I can just use the tip of my brush to kind of help give it the impression of being pine needles or branches here, if it's not wanting to just blend around and bleed on its own. I'm going to put a little bit of that blue under there as well, just so that I kind of get it nice and dark, because it is the base of the tree, so things would be getting darker and darker as they come closer to the base, right? So. I'm just assessing, do I want any branches anywhere else? I mean, this one really kind of swooped out, which, I mean, trees have that, right? Sometimes you get one that just kind of goes, woof. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to balance it at all over here, but I don't want to clone it either. What if I can just put one tiny little branch here? So it's not a clone, just a little more balanced. Does that make sense? It's not as low, but it just kind of keeps it from looking too oblong. Yeah, maybe like that. I think overall I'm happy with this tree. It's not perfect, but I'm happy. It feels loose and it feels playful. And so I'm going to call that good. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye.